Just describe the vibe of your film, Boys in the Trees.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a hard one to describe.
That's why I asked.
We call it a supernatural skater film set on Halloween 1997, which doesn't really tell people a lot. But I guess, growing up in Australia in the 80s and 90s, I grew up watching a lot of American coming-of-age films. You watch John Hughes, you watch Steven Spielberg, and then you graduate to films like The Craft and Empire Records. And I was looking at Australian cinema and I was thinking how it had been such a long time since we'd made a film for young people, and especially one that just celebrated our rites of passage and growing up in Australian suburbia, how much fun we have. So I wanted to do a film that summed that up. And I guess because I'm drawn to slightly creepy, eerie things, that sort of seeped its way into it too. So it's, I guess, a coming-of-age film, but a very haunted one.
What were the aspects of adolescence in particular that you wanted to highlight with this film? Being very careful not to give anything away.
Yeah, well, I guess you do what you have to survive adolescence, to survive those high school corridors. Some people are really good at fitting in and it's easy for them and that's great. And for them, high school might be the peak. But for a lot of people, high school doesn't begin until later. So they have to keep a low profile and hide in the shadows a little bit and hope they don't get sniffed out. So the film sort of explores all of that, about particularly focuses on three boys, I guess, who have taken very different approaches to surviving high school and what that means for them now that they're at the end of it. Because it is set on Halloween 97, which is the last night of high school for these boys. So they've reached the end of that and now they're about to become men. It's
a very strong anti-bullying theme in this film. Is this something that you suffered or that you witnessed at high school?
Yeah, no,
it's very prominent in the film.
Yeah, it's really funny because I never realised how prominent it was. I think we reveal ourselves in unexpected ways sometimes. And yeah, look, I mean, I guess I was on both sides of it. I was bullied at some point, but that stopped at a certain point, but then I was also the observer of it. And I would watch people and I wouldn't step in, and so that haunts you as well, I think.
Okay, now without giving away too much of the film, because there are some good twists and surprises in it, the film does involve bullying,
yes,
and regret for bullying and redemption, or an attempt at redemption. This seems like a very Catholic film. Are you Catholic? Are you aware of how Catholic this film is? And don't tell me that the rosary beads around the girl's neck was an accident, because when I saw that I thought there's something going on here. Is there?
Well, I'm not a Catholic, I should say. I went to Trinity Grammar, so I would watch the Catholics from next door at Xavier, but I wasn't one of them. But I guess I am interested in belief and guilt. I think what we get guilty about is very fascinating, and I guess the Catholics know that better than anyone.
Oh, absolutely. But just to make clear, no intention there or no religious undertones intended.
Well, no, I mean, I guess there's spirituality through the film. We're drawing on, it's Halloween, so we're drawing on some very ancient pagan beliefs, I guess. And we are filming at a Catholic school, so there are images throughout, but so I guess they are in there, and I'm very happy for people to read into that.
Now, you've been asked a million times about why you set the film in 1997. So just in condensed form, Nicholas, because I've heard it a million times, just give us your 25 words or less response to that often asked question.
Yeah, well, I guess with this film, I wanted the teenagers to be alone in the night, and I didn't want them to be receiving texts or Snapchats or posting photos on Instagram. So it felt like to go back to 1997 was a really interesting time when these characters could really talk to each other and look each other in the eye, and they could be alone in suburbia without someone texting to say, "Where are you?" And it was really fun. And there was an innocence to teenagers at that time. And the teenagers of that time are the adults of today. And so as we look at them, we grapple with where they came from.
Now, I know that the technology is ubiquitous.
Yes.
It's everywhere. But surely, Nicholas, could you not have risen to the challenge of keeping it set present day, but discounting all that technology, simply featuring it a lot less and not making a point of all the technology, just sort of acknowledging that there's internet and there are texts and once in a while someone will use a mobile, but simply not have it front and centre the whole time? Wasn't that an option that you could have set the film present day?
Oh, definitely. And I guess, like we're so used to it, especially in horror films, there's the old cliche of, oh, I've got no bars on my phone. And, but I didn't want to I wanted to avoid those really cheap, easy outs. And there's a difference in how teenagers communicate now. Like they have a very unique language that's so unique to this generation. And so I wanted to go back to a generation where the last pre-digital generation who could really not use all of that, and there's an innocence to them. The way they talk, there's a slight pretentiousness to them, and but naive at the same time, because they can't just look things up on Google. It takes too long to load up Netscape Navigator and try to get something out of Alta Vista. So they've just formed these strange opinions on things and beliefs about the world.
That's great, and I'm glad that you said that, because I was looking for a better answer to the question why set it in 1997. So thank you very much for that.
No worries.
Now, who is the intended audience for this film?
Well, it's really funny because it's kind of a split thing where, on the one hand, I'd love today's teenagers to see it because we make so few films in the Australian film industry.
Damn straight. I was going to challenge you and say, well, there are none.
The last one to me was Tomorrow When the War Began. I mean, I guess there was Girl Asleep this year, yes, on one hand, and really excited by that, and really glad that it feels like there's a new wave coming.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really short-sighted. Otherwise, there's no future for our industry if we're not encouraging our young people to engage with our own culture.
But you do want Australian teens to go see this film.
Oh, definitely. And we're going to be going out to high schools and getting them to meet the cast, because the cast are very good-looking, fun people, So I think the teenagers will really like them. But it's also for people who grew up in the 90s as well, who remember that era and remember that time with fondness. I think the soundtrack especially, and some of the fashion is really taking people back.
Now, I'm very keen to just nail you on, not nail you, to discuss with you about your influences, because I think there's something interesting here that I'd like to unpack. Yeah. How old are you, Nicholas?
I'm 36.
Okay, 36. So you were born
1979.
Okay, terrific. So Star Wars plus 2 years.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
yeah, so we grew up playing it.
Your influences, your film influences in making this movie, can you just go through them? They're very American, aren't they?
Yeah, I guess they are. And I think it's because there's actually a lack of Australian films that teach kids to play, in a way. Like I look at people like Steven Spielberg and Joe Dante and Richard Donner, and they gave me the best childhood a kid could have, because they taught me imagination and to play, like the Goonies and films like that. They're so exciting. And so I guess they were really an influence, filmmakers like John Hughes. And then as you get older, I got into filmmakers like David Lynch and Tim Burton. And so those filmmakers, I guess, taught me a bit of surrealism and more abstract ways of dealing with certain emotions. And the film itself does spin into quite a surreal place in the last half.
Don't give me the answer that you think I want with this next question, okay? Please be totally honest.
Yes.
Did Australian filmmakers feature in any major way, or are they mainly American?
Okay, so two in particular I did, and that Baz Luhrmann and George Miller. Simply because I love their ambition. I think those guys have just created such wild, ambitious worlds, and their work has travelled all over the world.
Also, two of the most Americanized filmmakers, you could say, or most American-like filmmakers that Australia's produced. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, there is nothing wrong with that. And I wanted to put to you, I find this really interesting, that in a way you are now a young filmmaker who is reflecting the lack of Australian film culture, certainly in the 1980s, that if we had the film culture that we deserved, if it was better, you'd be saying different things now. You'd be saying that there was more of a mix, but that you, of course, will cite American influences simply because there weren't enough good Australian films to influence you. That we were making, and I sat through them all, mate, we were making crap art house films from filmmakers who are only interested in entertaining their friends.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting thing because, I mean, in a way, we've always been really good at childhood stuff, kids stuff. Like, we've always done amazing kids' TV. And, in the 80s, I grew up on great films, things I love, like Playing Beatty Bow and Run, Rebecca, Rudd, like those films I actually really loved. And there were some great films in the 90s that were at least had a real modern hip feel, like Two Hands and Chopper and, Love and Other Catastrophes, so there was a great moment. But yeah, it is interesting because some people have criticised the film for feeling too American. But to me, that's what my youth was like. And also don't force feed a generation McDonald's and wonder why they vomit up French fries. You know, like that's kind of how, because I've had the argument with many people at funding bodies about, well, you have to really reflect every generation's culture. And if you're not going to reflect Gen Y's, well, then they won't have one, you know, so, or they'll create their own and it will feel very foreign to you. So, yeah, so I'm really passionate about it. And I love seeing young people and new filmmakers really reflecting their experiences. They're doing it really well in the online space, but they deserve to be in cinemas too.
There's also nothing to apologise for if you are heavily influenced by American film culture, especially because if you want to get a big audience, which presumably you do, there's surely no better model to follow or to observe or to learn from than the way the Americans do it. You presumably will adapt to your own ends and twist and bend and change to suit yourself, but you have a great model there.
Yeah, oh, thank you. And because, you know, my feeling is if you're going to ask somebody to go to the movies and spend $20 on a ticket and or everything else, you've really got to give them value for money. You've got to take them on a wild ride. And right now, you know, life's tough for a lot of people. They don't want to be depressed when they go to the movies. They want to escape. So let's give them something fun.
What is your view of Australian film at the moment? When you look at Australian film, what's your observations?
I think we're at the beginning of a really exciting wave. Like, I think in the last few years, I've seen some films that I've really loved, you know, like The Babadook and These Final Hours. And I actually think it's really interesting. I think some of the best filmmakers are coming out of, or the best films are being made in South Australia and Western Australia. There's some really exciting, innovative stuff coming out of there. And even things that aren't necessarily to my taste, but they're so fresh, like 52 Tuesdays, you know, like I go, they're bold and they're risk-taking. They're not afraid to take some chances. And I think we're lucky in Australia because we do have a government-funded system. So we should take some chances and risks and really find new ways to engage.